So I think we should go ahead and get started. What do you think, Jeff?
Yep, sounds good. Do you want to kick off and we'll introduce ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, welcome. My name is Rose Benedicts. I'm strategic consulting lead, which is just a nice fancy way of saying that I do consulting. You're in the right place for learning in the flow of work. My quote, we like to start with a quote here. My quote is that after an experience, or you could say during an experience, is when the learner is most highly motivated to learn. So when they're actually working or doing a task, doesn't have to be work, is when you're most intrinsically motivated. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Bloom. I'm a principal consultant. For those of you that might have been expecting Tess Taylor, apologies, she's not able to do this call. I'm here to keep an eye on your questions and to probably ask Rose a few questions. Rose is your expert, so she's going to be delivering most of the session. My quote, not very respectful really, in light of this being learning in the flow of work, is that Google can bring you back 100,000 answers, but a librarian can bring you back the right one. So.
I think that's a great quote, and I'll bring it up later, Jeff. Really good one. Excellent.
So just to let you know who we are, and before we get going, some of you will have been here before, but Rose and I work for Leo Learning. We're part of Learning Technologies Group. I won't spend long on this slide, but essentially we focus on learning and consultancy services, which is where Rose and I play. We work within Leo. We've recently merged with GP Strategies, so we've got quite a big learning and content creation and consultancy team now. Very excited to be working with our colleagues in GP Strategies. And then we also have a number of platforms, authoring tools, personnel systems, learning management systems, learning record stores, standards organizations, people that specialize in diversity and inclusion. So we're part of a big group. And what Leo does in particular is focus on strategy, content, and how technology can enable that. So our motto is to unlock your future through learning. But anyway, that's enough of us. Let's move on to the subject at hand.
Yes, wonderful. The great news about where we work actually is that because we own so many software platforms and services, those of us consultants like myself and Jeff get to learn from all of them and then bring it to you. That's what I like to take away from those slides. So, you know, there's so much stuff out there. How do you get it all to you? And one of the things that we like to do is try to distill it down to what we're hearing you ask about. So that's how we came to today, learning in the flow of work. It's a quick agenda. It's only 30 minutes. I can stay on for a few minutes after if there are questions. But since we only have 30 minutes, I want to really drive right to the heart of it. Get started with what is the definition, show some examples and non-examples. Those of you familiar with Gagne's 9 events of instruction will appreciate that, examples and non-examples. And then we're going to talk about 3 enablers. And then at the end, I'll give you some top tips, which look like the enablers, but with a little more detail. Just want to leave something practical, which I think we can do in 30 minutes. So without further ado, let's get, I want to start by talking about learning mode, where this came from, if you don't mind scooting on for me, Jeff. All right, so there's many reasons that learning in the flow of work is coming up now. The biggest one is that it came from the voice of you all. So we had a big breakout session that had many of your peers, colleagues come into it. It was a very intense 2 half days, a little bit over 2 half days. And we designed together the learning organization of the future. We did many things, but the main purpose was to look at what do our learners and what is the organization that does learning really well in the future look like. And ultimately, we came up with this big breakout, came up with 5 key strategies. And then we asked, okay, of these, which one do you want to know the most about? And learning in the flow of work was the absolute top. Also, LinkedIn Learning's 2022 workplace report, 2022 workplace report on learning put employee performance sort of right at the top in the top 5 most critical concerns. And I think that's really critical here because we're talking about performance. We're talking about, when we say learning in the flow of work, we're talking about keeping people in the work mode. We're not talking about giving them topics. We're talking about focusing on the tasks they do, performance first. So you're seeing this crop up everywhere. We've seen it crop up in the voices of people we work with. We're seeing it crop up with clients. We're seeing technologies pop up everywhere. It's sort of saying this is a big topic. So let's just jump right into the definition. I've already sort of alluded to it, but learning in the flow of work, we need to break it down a bit. because we use that word learning, and I think people think content and topics and so on, when in reality, when we're talking about learning in the flow of work, we're referring to work as the mode someone is in, right? So you might be in the mode of learning, you might be in the mode of playing, but we're concerned with people who are in the flow of, who are in the mode of work specifically. And work can look like other things. So work can look like a task. It can look like I'm finding something. It can look like I'm discussing something. But the point being that you're actually doing a task. There's something that you're performing, and you need learning at that moment. Next slide will have some good information on wrapped up definition for you. I think we might be having a little bit of a lag on the slide switch, but we're okay.
Yeah, I hope I haven't jumped too further ahead, but yeah, if it suddenly jumps further forward, I'll go back.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Jeff is running it for me since I am currently at the ATD conference and running it with one screen. So thank you, Jeff. All right, so those modes are really important to understand, because I think one of the things that have come out from our research and speaking with people is that learning in the flow of work, there's a big misconception that it's about providing learning while someone's working. While that definition is true, this is more about keeping people in the natural workflow. Here's a great example. There's that moment that you're working on something, whatever it might be. Maybe you're even, let's pick an example everyone can use. You're even trying to move something over, move an image over in a Google document or a Word document. And you have to go, okay, I just need to know how to do that. So you go look it up and you find it real quick and you jump right back in. You never really left work mode to do that. You didn't go consume content on the topic of Word or on images in Word or anything like that. You didn't change to the learning mode. Now, where this can fail, let's say you go to find how do I insert a certain image, and you end up for the next 10 minutes to infinity looking, searching, trying to find that one particular piece of information you need for the task. That's what happens in most cases. And in that case, what's happening is you've gone out of the work mode and into the search mode. Just-in-time learning is a great example, Morgan. I will get the next slide. I'm going to have some examples and non-examples, and I'm going to challenge you a bit on it. So learning and applying while you're in the natural flow of work. Jeff, did you?
Yeah, just before I move on, there was another question. I think it was also from Rebecca, who just wanted to repeat the name of the LinkedIn learning.
Oh, it's LinkedIn Work. I can't remember if it's Workforce or Workplace 2022 report. But if you look in the LinkedIn Workplace Learning, you'll find that report. I do believe it's publicly available. If you go back just one moment, I wanted to go back to, there's two more things on the slide, defining it performance first, not training first. One of the biggest things we've got to do as an industry to get this right is get our terminology right, change our vocabulary. It's about a task, not a topic. It's about performance, not a learning. And then these 3 Ps that you might have seen down here on the bottom right, that's a foreshadow. The 3 Ps, we'll talk about how to enable it, how to actually make it happen. So now definitely go on. Examples and non-examples. This is the contentious slide. So what I want to do first is take a moment to look at these, and then I want you all to challenge me, because I know some of these are probably a surprise. So challenge me, put it in the questions. Is this, have you seen something that you think it's not on here? Have you seen something, examples? Is there anything on here that you would challenge?
While we're waiting for people to come up with that, one of the things we were talking about, Rose, was you've got e-learning courses as a non-example of learning the flow of work, right? But if you've got a really small micro learn, a really small piece of digital learning, could that possibly cross the dotted line?
Really good question. So could they? Yes, you can. Now, it would have to be very, very task oriented, right? It wouldn't be the topic. So for example, if somebody is getting ready for their first sales meeting, right? And they've done all the work, they know everything. They just need to know what's going to happen in that meeting. They're saying, okay, at some point, what are some common questions the client might ask me, because I just want to prepare for that. If that microlearn is specifically on that topic, here are objections. And usually in this case, it's going to come from some sort of organizational knowledge. And somebody's going to know, here are the kinds of objections we hear. Or, hey, when you're in that first meeting, it works a lot better not to ask about this just yet. You need to ask about these things first. Or just a reminder, do more listening in this case before, those kinds of things. Yes. But once you get into piling in 2 or 3 tasks or going down the road in future tasks and not just right in that moment, that micro-learn is no longer considered an example of learning in the flow of work. Now, I've seen some questions come up. Do you want to shoot them at me, Greg?
Well,
Sorry.
Lucy's got an interesting question. I think she's possibly asking how selfish is learning in the flow of work. If you're the sort of person that's always asking the person next to you how to do something, can learning in the flow of work be a bit annoying?
Yeah, totally. Everyone's had that person that asks them 8,000 questions. You're like, you just need to get on with it. That's where the organization has some responsibility. And I'm going to put a pin in that and just say, because a lot of people are asking EPSS. EPSS stands for Electronic Performance Support System. It's an older concept and it's coming back, and I will absolutely explain it. Yes, so organizations come all the time with the question of, people know this content, people know the topics, people know the tasks, and they know how to do them, and they know how to do them really well. But how do you actually share that, and you don't end up with one person? Well, a couple things you can do there. One thing is we've seen people stand up as champions of knowledge sharing. You get people who are good at specific tasks to come together and notice the kinds of things they're being asked when they're being asked, what specific, not topic, but tasks they relate to, and then committing to sharing that. And you can share that, put up a resource, quick, hey, 10 tips before you go into your first meeting. It could be, hey, I just noticed that Form Y and Form X really only have one material difference. So you can copy Form X and add this to it, and ta-da, and it saves, 15 minutes off your work. Know that and share it. And you're gonna see these in my enablers as well. So a lot of questions are coming up about technology. But I really want to just say that question about how do you don't annoy someone, or people that if you don't have somebody to ask, everyone seems busy and you don't want to annoy them. What I really like about that is that social learning is probably one of the best examples of learning in the flow of work we have. We are not talking about an earth-shattering type of learning here, right? We're talking about how people naturally learn. That's how we do it. Jeff, you were talking to me earlier about how you just daily in your house going about something and you realize there's a screw loose on something, on a drawer or whatnot, and I just go get the wrench or spanner if you're in the UK and fix it myself. Or maybe I'm making pancakes and I quickly look up on YouTube a video that goes, how do I know when to flip it? That's great, right? Because you haven't left your work mode. Were there other questions that I missed? Because I think this is a really important.
There's one. Have we got an example of something that might relate to leadership? So learning about leadership in the flow of work. Have you got any examples that come into that category?
Yeah, we do actually. One of the big ones is coaching. That learning in the flow of work, people want it to replace coaching quite often, right? Again, it doesn't replace coaching. It's specifically about. So if you're a leader, I would imagine the most common is squidgy, because what's happening as a leader is you're thinking, how do I get my strategy across? How do I come up with a communication plan for this? How do I make a decision when I know it's going to make people upset? How do I coach a specific person? Back to coaching. And all of that, there's resources for that everywhere. It's a matter of getting your company started with making that content available and findable. And it might start by relying on a few people to say, hey, when I'm coaching someone, I've noticed that this happens a lot in our company. I've been coaching for 3 years. This topic always comes up. I'm going to put something out there on it. And this is where you get into the technology. I've seen a bunch of technology questions. There are ways to do this without technology. Like I said, you can set up a group who's an expert on, you go through your workflow. You have to start by going through the workflow and going, okay, we have experts and people who know these things, these things, these things. This person knows how to do this really well. Let's assign them as the people who go get questions and answer them for people quickly. And you can just get started in those kinds of simple ways by acknowledging it, maybe even rewarding it. So I think but we can go and switch to technology and say we are seeing a lot of technologies now emerging for how to do this. EPSS was a very early concept, maybe 20 years ago. It was a hot button 20 years ago, maybe a little longer. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't look that old, but I have been around for over 20 years in the industry. Okay, go ahead and compliment myself there. It's the good lighting in the hotel room. So what we're seeing now is WalkMe, which you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, is probably one of the most well-known. This is a form of learning in the flow of work, or electronic performance support system, that sits inside of Salesforce, for example. It sits inside a technology construct. So if it notices that you're working on something in Salesforce, it's going to go, hey, this how to complete this task is relevant to you right now. And that's easy, right? That's low-hanging fruit because as a system, tasks are more predictable. You don't have to go map out the workflow quite as much. It's done by tasks cut up. But we're starting to see 2 or 3 companies emerge now with technology. Ask Delphi is one that's starting up. Well, sorry, they've been around a while. I should say starting to get some notoriety that I'm happy to tell you about, which is more doing it in the ambient construct of what the workflows are for your workplace that don't have to do with technology.
And some of it's technical, right? But some of it's still behavioral, isn't it? And doing the same thing. So if I'm moving too slowly through this deck, Rose, you might say, you do know you can press the forward arrow to move forward. You don't have to scroll it on the mouse. And now that might just be Rose nagging, or it might be Rose teaching. I'm not sure, but
well, are there any other questions?
Culturally, it's you know, the equivalent of being prepared to ask and to offer, you know, in the moment, isn't it? There are a couple more questions. There was one about LXPs and LMSs, whether LMSs and LXPs can support learning the flow of work. I think it's very much dependent on how the content is constructed. So if you've got content that's highly searchable and you've got very good search features and you deliver that content in very small sizes, it can be absolutely relevant to the task. But an awful lot of stuff that's on LMSs and even on LXPs isn't in that structure.
Yeah. And that's the answer to this question around how do people solve the challenge when it's related to a virtual environment, right? One of the things that we lost by going virtual or hybrid in working is the person right next to you, right? But, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing some of these technologies come out of the woodwork right now. I can name a couple others, but I haven't looked into them personally yet, so I'd be hesitant to share them. But they are, I think in this context, the person who's asking the question, I think might be coming from a higher ed, and higher ed is actually a place that does it really well, does learning in the flow of work really well and it's the exact opposite. We can do, corporates can do learning in the flow of work really well when it's like a highly task-based regulated technology is involved, so on, right? That's the way that we can see the path to do it easily. In higher ed, what you're seeing is you have, or any ed, I should say, it's not just higher ed, but what you're seeing is the people who are the design of the class, the best designed classes are designed around project work or so on, in which the learning is embedded. That is a great example. It's like just like extreme on the job training, right? Where the only difference would be that the work that they're doing is not in a business context, but that's but we're seeing those come along. And maybe we should move along in the slides.
Should we move along? There's a couple of questions we can come back to, but let's keep the pace going. So you talked about the 3 Ps, Rose.
3 Ps are really important. Praise, permission, provision. I gave these 3 Ps just so that they were more memorable. You will recognize these words that are not foreign concepts, but praise, I would like to change this. Praise means reward, essentially. But I think praise is really important because it's about taking the stories of people doing it well. So in this example, somebody said, hey, I want to ask this person, but this person's too busy over and over again. That person has to take some responsibility for going, I get this question all the time related to this task. I'm going to put a quick video up. I'm going to put out a quick email to people. Email is not the greatest example because it doesn't exist forever. Or if I have an LMS or an LXP that allows me to put up content and share it with people, I'm going to go do that and make sure. And then you tell those stories and you share those stories. Maybe you have a reward system for people who contribute specifically and say, hey, I'm an expert on this workflow. I'm going to go, I know these are the 2 hot button issues. I'm going to go make a quick handout, a quick job aid, a quick 5x6 little piece of paper digitally, right? That has the tips or how to do it or how to think about it so somebody can access it. And then you reward that. And then you tell the stories of somebody, you start to tell the stories around, you have people who have gone through onboarding and all of a sudden they're able to do things a little bit faster and learn those tasks a bit quicker. So you'll see real results. And then you share that too. So-and-so was using these resources that, Jim put up these resources and Vivian's using the resources and what a cool story that is. And Vivian was able to do her onboarding much faster and up to speed much faster because she used it. So praise comes in all forms and you've got to, and that's the cultural linchpin there too. Permission is the second point of an enabler. Permission is an ambient thing. That means that it's okay for people not to go spend time. we love as L&D learners and as the business, we love to say, here's an hour, go do some training. We love to say that. It's measurable, it's easy. We feel like we're giving people space, but in the world where learning in the flow of work is going to be possible, that permission, that time looks more like do it when you need to do it. It's a lot more like here's when, you have permission to go make some content and share it. So there's permission around making the content and share it. There's permission around, okay, I don't actually need a whole hour, but I know that this task, the first time I do it, is going to take me, probably 2 hours longer. But now, thankfully, people are sharing task-based content, and I can all of a sudden do it a lot more quickly. So permission is many. It's permission to have the time. It's permission not to do learning as a time-boxed activity. It's permission to say, I'm noticing these things and share them. It's permission to look through for L&D people. It's our permission to look through the workflow and go, we know we need content on these tasks. So that permission is the second clear enabler. And then provision. I would like to change this. I'm going to go ahead and change my mind that the task-based content is accessible. But I think the key here is it's findable, not just searchable, findable, because all too often we see people breaking out of the work mode and going into search mode because they just can't find the content. Because no one's done the first two to enable it. So this all comes together in a nice package. And that's why you could call them reward and permission and accessibility or findability, but I thought the P's might be easier to remember. 3 P's.
I've just thought of something. Well, so one of the questions that's come in from N Alexis, I'm not sure what the first name is there, but talking about provision of this type of content, and as it sounds like as an organization, they're providing content in small digestible sizes that's searchable, that's that meets a lot of the requirements to be able to be learning in the flow of work. But actually, the question that they have is, how do you get learners into this mode? You've talked about permission and praise. Those are 2 great things. But also, I thought of 3 more P's. So they're pushing information, but learners are sometimes pulling information. So, push and pull. But what about the learners themselves? They can provide a lot of this stuff too, can't they?
Absolutely. This is not something that experts have to build. In fact, some of your main gems might be the person doing the task for the first time. Yeah, I think that absolutely, Jeff, 100%. You can add more P's to this. We can add more P's to it. I do think push and pull is a squishy one for me, because when you push content to somebody, you're presuming, right, to know that that's content they need. And let's talk about how we use the word content. We don't necessarily use the word help you with a task. And let's be very, very honest. In L&D, we talk about content. We often are talking about a topic. And that's, again, going back to our vocabulary. This is about tasks, workflow. And let's keep going. And I can stay a few more minutes for extra questions, but we're almost to the end of the main slides.
So yeah, every time I pause, it doesn't, it hesitates to move me on.
Oh, that's all right. Right. So these are just some of the tips, which I think these tips answer a lot of questions, and it is not a complete list by any means. I would love to hear more. We're probably going to be doing more in this. We'll definitely be doing more in this space. So someone's help encourage sharing at all levels. I saw somebody say, hey, managers have to be on board. Oh, you bet. Managers have to be doing it. Leaders have to be doing it. You need to role model it. Now, I know we say this for any big learning initiative, or I would call this a strategy, not necessarily an initiative. For any of these strategies, we talk about everyone needing to be on board. You don't need to get everybody there at once. Find the group and get started with it. When you start seeing the results, it's going to pick up. That go back to the P about praise and sharing the stories and so on. But you're absolutely right. But you can't, you have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. Don't worry about that whole elephant just yet, right? And that will be your barrier to entry. Break down silos, making it centralized. So as soon as you can, you start with a pocket group, start going and branching out as you can. Find people to contribute. Finding people to contribute is a really, really, really good tip. And that's all around this tip 3 I've already said, share and praise the successes, but also the, when I say a pocket, it doesn't have to be a workflow or a topic-based group of people to get it started, or pocket to get it started with. It can just be people willing to contribute. And they don't necessarily have to be in the same area. As an L&D person, I would recommend you start by saying, okay, where are the workflows that need trouble or that have trouble? Let me go look at the workflow and find those moments and start provisioning content specifically around that.
That relates to one of the questions is, do we have to design this sort of stuff differently as learning professionals? And just before you answer that, I've got an observation on that, and that is that not everything needs to be designed as learning in the flow of work.
Oh God, yes.
If you're teaching, this is not the late. This is an important new direction, but it's not. We're not going to switch everything across to this. If you're learning how to drive, you don't jump in the car straight away without an instructor and learn as you go, I hope.
It also doesn't displace, Jeff, thank you so much for saying that. This doesn't displace all of the other great strategies we have. This doesn't replace, your access to LinkedIn Learning or Degreed or Content Curator. It doesn't replace those things. This is a strategy that goes along with it. It also answers, and the reason why it's so critical is because it answers the question, how do we start switching our culture around a bit? And this learning in the flow of work is a big one. The number 5 is I think one of the most tactical tips that people on this call can probably take away, which is look at those workflows, find where there are barriers, find where there are hiccups, and put the content out specifically around those tasks. So if that's not happening in however you're determining what content is necessary within your L&D, and that could be because a business told you to, right? Or it could be that you have some say in, but getting into this practice of looking at the workflows and finding what's going on in there, and then finding the people to help create content specifically around those tasks is critical. And then making it findable, that's also part of it. And then encouraging learning as a work activity. So I would be so bold as to say, stop telling people you have 2 hours to do learning. I mean, certainly there's a place for that, right? Onboarding is a place for that. Compliance training is always going to have a place for that. But in terms of other content, it doesn't help to learn the topic all at once. It's only going to help you once you're in there doing it and you go, oh, all right. Anybody who's ever onboarded somebody knows there's this phenomenon, right? It goes, I'm going to tell you something 1,000 times, and you're still going to have a moment where you go, oh, I wish you would have told me that. And that moment is the moment when you were actually working on it and it hit you, right? We're talking about being really careful about those kinds of moments. And then using learning in the flow for problem solving. I don't want to make it sound like all learning in the flow of the work is tiny, because sometimes the work itself is not tiny. So let's say the work is, we're doing our product roadmap, or annual product road mapping, right? You might have a large bit of information that you need sort of happening at the exact same time as you're planning that, right? That's all learning in the flow of work. That would be a big moment where you're in work mode and learning mode at the same time in order to get a task done. So it doesn't always have to be small. It can be big ones as well. You can go to the next slide. I think we just have some places where you can get additional resources and reach out to us. I am happy to stay on for another few minutes. We have one poll, if you are willing to stay on, while we still have 100 and something people. Would love to go in here and ask. These are the 5 strategies that came out of the big breakout, as well as the ones that we're seeing crop up in other places. So if you just take a few minutes to let us know which one you want to hear more about. And it could be learning in the flow of work. That's not up here, but I mean, you can just type that in if you want to hear more. In 30 minutes, really what I wanted to accomplish was, do we have a definition? Are we starting to really understand what we mean when we say that it's this task-based staying in the mode of work? I think that's really where we need to start with this in order to make it useful and understand it in its reality.
There's a couple of clear leaders coming up on the poll. It'll be interesting to see how it finishes up.
Yeah, let's see. What do we got? Human-centered design. Absolutely. I'll say one thing about that. We are talking about human-centered design. You will see that, so stay posted. Human-centered design is absolutely critical to learning in the flow of work, so I absolutely love that. Human-centered design, we all think about it all the time, right? We're going to design for humans. That's all well and good, but we don't tend to involve the humans that we're designing for all that often. So I'll leave it with that happy thought that we tend to forget.
And if you're interested in hybrid learning, Rose and I are fascinated by this topic, and we've both spoken on it before. And there are some resources on the Leo website, but if it's really popular, we'll come back to it because it's a cool one.
Absolutely. So if we go ahead and take us to the end slide, so you can have our conversation, you can see our emails if you would like. Happy to stay on a few more minutes for more questions, and I'm able to look at them now.
So there's our contact details if you need those.
Yep, there's a great question earlier from Georgia. What about e-learning that's done in learning mode and then you refer back to in the flow of work? That is a great question, Georgia, because that strikes right at the heart of where I think we need to put learning, we need to understand learning in the flow of work a bit better as an industry. And that is, if you're switching them to that learning mode, if it's not helping them directly complete the task they're currently doing, if it has any more to it that you're putting in there because you assume that's part of content that needs to be known in order to do that task, all of that is not learning in the flow of work. That's having learning available when you work, which is also good. Again, I'm hitting hard on this strategy, but it's not the only one, and it's not the only way to do it, and it shouldn't be in a vacuum. But I would, in this case, George, I would say that's not an example. That's more of a traditional learning.
There was one you might have missed earlier on, which was from AD, which was another 2 Ps, peer-to-peer. I like that one.
Peer-to-peer is great. And in fact, peer-to-peer is where we see some of the best content being nominated up, because you have that peer-to-peer contact and somebody says, well, that was a great idea. Let's, sometimes it helps to have the social responsibility of going, okay, more people need to know this. This would help more people finish this task. This would help more people complete.
Well, we obviously want to respect your time. So if you've got a hard finish, Rosa said she'll stay on for a little bit longer to answer any more questions, but that's the end of the sort of the formal 30 minutes. So if you have another meeting to go to, this is your friendly reminder, but we're also very pleased for you to hang on for a bit longer as well.
Yeah, so somebody was saying, I'm still not seeing how this is substantially different than just-in-time learning. I would think just-in-time learning is it could be broader. Just-in-time learning is a concept that embodies many things, learning in the flow of work being one of them. It also covers the microlearn. It covers I would think just-in-time learning, just-in-time learning or anything in that category, I think, is about getting closer to the sweet spot of the moment when it's needed, and getting as close to that as possible, which can be learning the flow of work, can be absolutely that, but just-in-time training, just-in-time learning, whatever, would be a bigger umbrella that would have other things under it. And I think, Rebecca, the big one for me is that it's difficult for us as an industry to see. I think as these technologies start to come out more so and are based on data, you can see what the tasks that people are doing, and it's a bit it can be a bit predictive, but it's also helps with understand relevancy. I think it's going to be easier to envision, because right now it looks a heck of a lot like social learning, and that's okay. And I think those are.
I don't think we're getting many more questions. Is there any we missed?
So in 30 minutes, I hope we did a good job. 30 minutes seems very short. I had a great time. Putting this together. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. We do have a white paper coming out, actually. Somebody just asked about this resource. We do have a white paper coming out. If you're on this call, you should get it. If you're on this webinar, you should get that.
Yeah, and we do review the questions. The questions aren't just useful in the moment, learning in the flow, as it were, but they're also useful and inform, some of the stuff that we put out after these events as well. So we'll capture the questions, and thank you all for coming. Great attendance.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. Have an excellent lunchtime, dinner time, evening time, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining.